Hello, everybody. My name is Dwayne Cook, and I want to welcome you to another Lutheran World Relief Conversations. We are so excited that you are here with us, as well as our special guests. Over the last few months, our donor advisor team has been connecting with our devoted Lutheran donors to talk about this humanitarian crisis we're experiencing and ask for your generosity. One of the cornerstones of Lutheran World Relief is our humanitarian assistance, and I want you to leave this conversation knowing why we are asking for your help. To hear the impact of our work we have already done because of your gifts, and to hear what's happening in the field and update you to keep you connected. That said, I have the pleasure to chat with two dedicated and passionate leaders in our humanitarian efforts. While they work in the most fragile, conflict-torn, and disaster-affected areas in the world, I want to note that there are so many other program field staff around the world making impact as they are. Natural disasters and conflict-driven emergencies ravage the lives and livelihoods of hundreds and millions of people each year. Because of the support from you, our donors and friends, we are able to save lives. Thank you. Let me introduce you to our Chief Humanitarian Officer, Tamara Demuria, and Senior Director, Fred McCray. Thanks for being here tonight.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having us, Dwayne.
Would you two like to kick us off by sharing where you are in the world right now and your roles in our humanitarian assistance efforts, please?
Let me start it off. Welcome, everybody. We're really delighted to have you. And it's my pleasure to represent LWR and give you a quick snapshot of how your support is helping us around the world. I do have an interesting background that you see right behind me, and this is my Washington, D.C. office, but not for too long. I'm heading to Ukraine. So this was a gift, a beautiful flag that shows the support of American people and how Ukrainians are super grateful receiving that loving support and hand from all of you. And your donations have been definitely tremendous and life-changing for thousands of Ukrainians who supported for the last year and a half. Unfortunately, it is still the ongoing war, and it's something that breaks our hearts and really motivates us to do even more and even better as we progress. I am overseeing the global portfolio, which means I basically am responsible for all of our humanitarian operations. I have beautiful colleagues that help me manage this because there is unfortunately a lot happening around the world, many disasters that we have to respond to with life-saving operations. Fred is one of them as part of our team. We do have other distinguished colleagues and broader Lutheran World Relief colleagues that are doing their best in running operations and helping us programmatically. We work in about 30 plus countries, so it gives you the breadth and scope of how much we have to cover. And you would agree with me and not be surprised that the disasters have evolved over time. What we were seeing 10 years ago is no longer what we see as humanitarian crisis. And we're seeing more and more of that affecting peri-urban areas, urban areas, very developed countries, and not just those third world countries that we used to hear for years. So unlike, you would assume humanitarian assistance is done going back 30 years when it was just the distributions, we're actively working with the communities, asking them what is the best contextual resolution of their problems? How can we best meet their needs that speak to them in their community, in their country, given their needs? So a lot of that flexibility is what we focus on, and I really am proud to be the voice and extension of all of your support in these countries. I'll be heading out to Ukraine and proudly represent all of you, as well as bring back the huge gratitude that I always get asked to pass on to our generous donors. So nice to see you online, and I look forward to this conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fred McCray. I am the Senior Director for Humanitarian Operations. In that role, I support our global humanitarian portfolio with technical assistance and capacity building for our country offices. I also oversee our material resources program. I think many of you may know of it by the name of the Quilts and Kits. name, but I help coordinate that activity globally. And then, as Tamara mentioned, like everyone on our team, I deploy for rapid onset emergencies. I'm currently in Turkey, in the city of Adana. This is our operational headquarters for our Turkey earthquake response program. I deployed as the team leader for the start of our Turkey emergency operations. It was just a very daunting situation with so much destruction. But I really want to re-emphasize what Dwayne and Tamara have said about how important your help and your support is. It was because of that support that our team was able to deploy so quickly, to engage with local partners, and to start delivering assistance very, very quickly to affected communities. So thank you very much for your support. Turn it back to you, Dwayne.
Hey, Fred, we had overwhelming amount of questions from the registration or audience. So I got one for you right now. What's happening with the refugees in Turkey, and how are we rebuilding their lives?
It's a great question. So currently there are over 3 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. They make up the largest refugee group. There are also refugees from Afghanistan and Iran, also here in Turkey, but Syrian refugees are the largest. Of that 3 million that are registered, only 90,000 of them have residence permits, and so that's what legally allows them to work. So you have a large population of refugees that are stuck in the informal sector, trying to create livelihoods for their families while they're dependent on limited social services. Unfortunately, Syrians are at the bottom of the social and economic ladder here in Turkey. They are the last to receive assistance, even in this disaster that affected so many, 50,000 fatalities. The government of Turkey rallied as best it could to provide support, but it did prioritize natural-born Turkish citizens for support. And so for CHORUS, our programs, we target Syrian refugees, especially for services. So here in Turkey, our program with our local partners encompasses shelter, transitional shelter, food assistance, distribution of hygiene items, child protection in the form of child-friendly spaces, women's safe spaces, and also mental health, trauma counseling, and psychosocial support. As you can imagine, there's been a huge amount of mental trauma, psychological trauma, with a huge loss of life and just destruction of livelihoods. So that's where our priorities are, where our efforts are focused, and our primary target is Syrian refugees, but of course we provide assistance to everyone in need.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot of work. Thanks for what you're doing over there, Fred. As I mentioned, we received a lot of great questions from our friends desiring more information about our humanitarian work and impact. A side note to all of our partners and donors, if you ever have any questions about our work, please connect with your donor advisor. They're on the screen as well. Teresa, Beatrice, and Colleen, and myself. We are here to assist you and answer any questions, or if we need to get something out to the field, we can do that as well. So I just want to thank everyone for the questions they submitted. So 300 countries, it's amazing. Quotes and kits, it's a lot going on. And I know we've been talking so much about Ukraine and Turkey, but there's still more work ahead of us. Tamara, a question that came in was, 30, excuse me, not 300, thank you. A question that came in was focused, our focus has been Ukraine and Turkey, and it's been a forefront of our efforts. But can you tell us what other impacts we're making in other countries around the world? Maybe that 10-foot view of our humanitarian work.
Absolutely. And it's ironical when you say 300. We would love to lower the number of countries where we respond with humanitarian crises and respond to disasters. Unfortunately, the number is growing. We would never imagine operating in Ukraine because it was a relatively developed country doing its own thing and living beautiful life. And here we are. We have a huge portfolio, huge programming, supporting internally displaced people, saving lives, working at the front lines, very close to the front lines in the villages that are impacted. And this is just a glimpse of what we do in countries like that. Obviously, this is not just Ukraine, not just Turkey. There are multiple countries in West Africa, East Africa, Middle East, Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, where we have ongoing programs that stem from humanitarian crisis and then eventually develop into more sustainable growth and accompaniment of the communities to really get them on the path of development, and the other way around. Sometimes we have beautiful agriculture development programs and a natural disaster hits, and we have to deploy to really find solutions for those impacted vulnerable populations that we work with to not lose everything and not lose the basic livelihoods so that they don't find themselves in the bottom, the sort of percentage of the poverty or vulnerability. And this is an ongoing struggle and battle. Just to give you a couple of examples, and especially the proximity of this country and how it circulates on the news will not be a surprise to some of our listeners. Haiti. We've heard a lot about Haiti, earthquake after earthquake, hurricane after hurricane, and now the country is just going through critical transition of how it is ravaged by gang violence. What you can imagine we respond to in Haiti is essential healthcare access. Pregnant mothers cannot give birth, or they die during childbirth, which was already the biggest issue in Haiti, particularly with the country being so high on the list of maternal and infant deaths. Now this is getting even worse. Sexual and gender-based violence as a weapon of war. Unfortunately, this is very much present in not just conflicts, but also civil unrest impacted countries. Some of the countries that are going through recurring humanitarian crises of natural disasters and beyond. In countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, we also work with the internally displaced, the conflict and the battle for power and different groups that are really impacting the internal flow and daily lives of the population have displaced thousands. And what we're doing is really finding solutions that are intermediate, not even longer term at the moment, because of the flow and waves of displacement. This could be camps that we support, tents, very basic tents where people find and seek shelter as an interim solution. We provide access to clean water. We provide access to basic medical services for them to contain or manage diseases or avoid any other types of public health emergencies. So it is really changing as the landscape and the environment where we have to operate versus Lutheran World Relief 30 years ago. Before, this was very narrow to a certain locality and geography in the world, and now this has just blown up in our face because of the critical climate change impact on so many countries, particularly in some of the countries in the Sahel region. Droughts, continuous droughts or continuous floods, or how this changes the landscape, deforestation. A lot of it is what we think is somewhere out there in longer term. But if you look at how the most vulnerable populations that are already struggling to make the ends meet are impacted by to secure daily food, to secure daily cost of living, by losing jobs or not having enough to earn for the families that are numerous. So these are some of the areas where humanitarian work of Lutheran World Relief is focusing right now. It ranges from supporting refugees finding safe and dignified solutions in countries that welcome them temporarily or for good. It also focuses on internal displacement and waves of people that seek shelter across their own country in different parts of the country where they have not been welcomed particularly. We see a lot of tribal issues, a lot of challenges related to conflict, and we work across health, livelihoods, agriculture, reconstruction. Those places that have been known for some production are really impacted and experiencing a lot of the loss of harvest, ability to plant and secure the daily life. So it is an interesting and yet very sobering reality, and that support that we get from the donors, like what we have as our participants online, is critical. Definitely changing for so many.
Yeah, and I love where you're going there. Speaking of like limited resources, how do you decide? Just a follow-up question: how do you decide where to focus with limited resources that we have?
That's a great question, and you're absolutely right. And whoever asked this question probably assumed that there's so much happening and so many competing priorities. We don't work in isolation, and I think this is the key part. We don't work just as Lutheran World Relief. We work in partnership with our local organizations, partners that have intimate knowledge of what's happening on the ground, as well as we work very closely with other international organizations, the UN. These are structures that manage what is called humanitarian environment and architecture, because nobody can pull off the response of a magnitude that is required in certain countries. We know that the resources of a single organization will never be enough. There needs to be that coherent collaboration and coordination, and this is how we define how much of the capacity already exists in a country where there may be something happening, and how much of the needs are met by the resources or abilities of other partners that already have established presence or magnitude of programs that can take on additional caseload and additional cohort of people that have become vulnerable. Obviously, as humanitarian and development organization, we do have a mandate to respond where we have presence. And if there is a public emergency, international level crisis, then we also review how can we pull the flexibility of our own funding that is generously donated by the donors, like our Lutheran constituents, to start a response in a country X. This was the case for Ukraine, for instance. We didn't have presence there, but because this was so huge and it was just suffering of enormous level, as well as in Turkey with thousands and thousands dying because of the earthquake, and the generous support of our partners like Lutheran donors, we were compelled to step in and add to the level of effort of others, which was not enough to cope with the reality.
Yeah. Wow. I got one more follow-up that came from our friends online. Are you seeing any emerging areas of potential crisis?
It's a tricky one, and I'll try to answer it, but I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. We tend to zoom into what the news feed us with, and this is the reality. You see Ukraine, you see Turkey, you see some other countries pop up in the news, and that's where the focus shifts. But let me give you an example of what we call internally, when we discuss programmatically, ripple effects of certain crises happening elsewhere and how they impact the rest of the world. For example, Ukraine and Russia were the biggest producers and exporters of grain and vegetable oil. With what's going on in that part of the world and the conflict we're seeing between these two countries, has a ripple effect on Yemen, has a ripple effect on South Sudan, Uganda, and you would think, why? But it is exactly that linkage that we don't always realize as to how much that world economy is interlinked, and what certain crises emerging and really escalating in one part of the world can mean or will mean for the countries that are already struggling. Lebanon, as an example, depends 76% on grain imported from Ukraine. With the port closed and nothing shipped out of that country, you can imagine what that means for the Lebanese population to access flour. And they bake a lot of things. Bread is one of the foods that they consume. So readjusting and prices that spike, and we've seen twofold, threefold increase of prices for fertilizers for some of those staple items that I just listed, completely destroying the local market. So the buying capacity changes, vulnerable people become even more vulnerable, poverty hits a whole new level of complexity, and we're just seeing this tremendously impacting some of the countries of the world. So there is so much that is hidden between the conflicts of a certain country or between certain countries, and we're just very concerned and very worried that those numbers are skyrocketing, and it's a global call for not just one single organization or a single nation, but worldwide global call to really pull both the resources together as well as the power to facilitate alleviation of that suffering at a global level.
Yeah. Tamara, it seems like there's a lot going on and happening in our world when it comes to natural disasters and real world emergencies, assisting people and building some normalcy back in their lives after tragedy. We really appreciate what your team is doing. And I know our donors appreciate that as well. I've got another question. And Fred, I want to ask this to you. Fred, what does the word hope mean to the people you engage with in the field?
That's a great question, and one that hits home today in particular. Hope is everything. Here in Turkey, we work with a local partner that focuses on trauma counseling, mental health, and psychosocial support. And we're now at the 6-month mark after the earthquake. And what their team of clinical psychologists are seeing is hopelessness, kind of a deeply entrenched hopelessness among both adults and children, a hopelessness that centers on the idea that life will never get back to normal, that children will never be able to go out and play as they once did. They'll never be able to get back to school with their friends. Just this general sense of hopelessness that this dark moment that they're caught in will never end. And so that's why it's so important for the work that we do to be able to stand with communities and show them that they are not alone, that there is support for them. There are people who care about them, who want to help them rebuild their lives. It's going to be a long process. It's going to take years to rebuild Turkey, to rebuild the affected areas, but it's so important that we're able to show people that we stand with them, that we're in solidarity with them, and that we'll stand with them for the long haul.
Yeah. I'm on a side note you here. I know you mentioned the Quote and Kit program, and I remember last month we had Pastor Tim Crick with us, who shared some of the things he saw while he was in Turkey and Ukraine. And one of the things he mentioned is, the quotes and kits and being able to give that to people. And I just remembered when you said hopelessness, and I wrote that down. He talked about the hope that people had, that someone saw. And so I just, that sticks with me from that conversation, and knowing you mentioned quotes and kits, how important that is to get something to say we're standing with you.
It's that human connection.
Yeah.
And I was going to call out Reverend Tim, but I was going to play nice. But it's that human connection that lets people know, kind of in their darkest moments, when they have just been overwhelmed and lost everything, that people halfway around the world care about them and support them and are standing with them.
Yeah. Fred, I got another question just to piggyback off that. Fred, what does success look like in our efforts?
I think success really for us, we have measurable indicators in terms of, for food assistance, the number of meals distributed, or the number of households that have received hygiene kits or have received different services. But in a holistic sense, success for us means communities and families being able to return to some sense of normal, to believe that they have access to the resources they need to live their lives with dignity, with security, that they're able to provide for their children's well-being, for their education. They're able to provide a sense of safety and security for their children. I mentioned going back to the sense of hopelessness and despair. That's been one of the things that's also come out, is that parents, even after they've lost so much, that they don't feel like they have time to grieve, because they're so busy trying to provide for their families, trying to stabilize the lives of their families and their children and give them some sense of safety and security. And so I think once we can help communities get to that point and families get to that point, that will be success.
Yeah, that's great. That is so awesome. Tamara, let me ask you this. All this we've heard has been touching. It's been great. Thank you for sharing the impact, Fred. And Tamara, what's the immediate need in our humanitarian assistance program? Like, if you had $1 million, what would you do? You know, what could we take care of? And also on the other side of that, what happens when we don't have enough funds to finish some of the projects that we have?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking this. Let me start from the last part of it, or the second part of the question, and then come back to the first one. It is of extreme importance to understand how the flexible resources, and we call them relatively flexible resources, right, for a certain response in a given country, and how they help us both position us better to talk to the government and seek more of an institutional funding that is allocated and is part of how the humanitarian operations get funded. But there's always this difference in the leg of time. There's always that gap between how fast those institutional resources arrive. When the US government makes a decision on fund partners, including LWR, in a given context, it doesn't happen immediately, and it may take up to a month. You can only imagine what happens to those people that are without roof above their head, with no water, no food, no nothing, and they're basically at the mercy of God. So this is where these flexible resources are vital, and they're really hitting on the life-saving needs and the points that I've just listed earlier, and Fred has been giving as examples as well. I always say that material resources and kits and quilts are a fantastic way of reaching those that really lose everything overnight, and they're with bare hands sitting and waiting for the miracles to happen because they don't know what to do. But yet that is not always enough, and sometimes having cash ability to purchase something locally if the markets are functioning, or for us to purchase regionally closer to the country and cut down on the logistics costs, on time that is required to import something from overseas. And we've had multiple examples during COVID how logistics worldwide just froze because everything shut down. So none of our wonderful kits could make it to the country because there was a long list and wait time to actually transport the cargo to a given country. However, locally, countries were adapting, and had we had enough cash, we could have procured masks, we could have procured hygiene items, we could have procured things, or just give, just a little bit of cash for people to really make choices that are more dignified in meeting their needs. So this is where the need is of having that flexibility and ability to invest and operate, to be there within 72 to 48 hours of a disaster. And that's not how the formal side or the institutional side of funding unfortunately works. So we use this support and resource that we source from our Lutheran friends to really be that effective and be on the ground and respond to the crisis immediately. What we are seeing now is depleting resources because the crises are growing, and it's unfortunately just too much happening in different parts of the world. I talked about displacement, the climate-related disasters that even further exacerbate vulnerabilities of certain families. I spoke about the conflict in certain countries. So that resource is not very stretchable. And I guess we have to make choices of dropping certain parts of the world by just not being able to support there. Spreading too thin is not always the answer. And unfortunately, we have to make those radical choices if we don't have the flexibility to extend that caring hand. This is where, with $1 million, we can launch creative solutions in specific crises that prove the concept to the donors so that the bigger donors are interested in funding it longer term or bigger scale. We can bridge the gap of the funding winding down and the projects closing out because we can't sustain certain support services for long. For example, we had to close certain medical services. Mobility of the services was key because of the health facilities not functioning, but we had to run the doctors in a little minivan so that they could go around and provide the diagnostics and treatment and prescriptions to some of the affected families. This can go forever, unfortunately, but when the conflict is ongoing and there is no longer term solution yet, maintaining the service and ability for people to survive and not, default to some negative solutions is really critical. So that's where those millions or those small resources, no matter how small they are, really we put them together and it becomes a very impactful and powerful tool for us to be effective, to support the life-saving operations, and to prove to other donors that are thinking through wonderful strategies that we are the right partner of choice. And we've been super lucky, as well as work hard to build those relationships, maintain them in different countries. And this type of injective funds is critical.
Nice. Tamara, I think you snuck into my last question. But I want to be respectful of time, so I've got one more final question from our audience. Why is this humanitarian fundraising effort to engage our donors vital in your work today?
We give and we receive a lot of gratitude. We see the impact and how lives of people change. I think this is what kept me going in my humanitarian career for so many years, because I've been to the hardest parts of the world and sometimes risking my own life. And so do any one of us on the team and broader across the Lutheran World Relief. I think this is where we see that with a little bit of help, we save lives of people that have that hopelessness, but yet they see that, with a little bit of support, they can get back on track. And I think this is where it starts with humanitarian, and very often for us, it turns into a wonderful accompaniment of these communities to really see the sustainable development. I've seen many countries, many places, many communities where they've started with earthquake or hurricane response or flood response, and now they're thriving and striving in so many ways, doing, launching creative production lines of vegetables and fruits and whatnot. And this is one of the flagship programs that we take huge pride in, and seeing that big impact, a longer lasting impact, and not just the humanitarian side of it, is where it is important to not leave those brothers and sisters of ours alone when they have the critical moments in life. And I think that's where I see the biggest help and the need to invest to really help them get over that hump and continue thriving across. Yeah.
Sweet. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I really get passionate when I talk about this and can go on forever. But it is like really touching the impact, and we do touch that impact, and hopefully we do justice to everything that we see, bringing back the messages and gratitude to our donors.
Awesome.
I would totally agree with Tamara, not only because she's my boss, but she makes a great point. The resources that we're able to raise through the support of friends like all of you is important in terms of speed, as timeliness matters in these rapid onset emergencies. For the Türkiye response, our team was able to deploy within days. We were there while the search and rescue teams were still literally finding survivors and pulling them out of buildings. And so we were able to mobilize resources, coordinate with partners to start getting life-saving interventions in place. And so it's the resources that allow us to do that, and that timeliness, it's critical.
Yeah, listen, I'm so grateful that you two came and shared with us today. I know there might be more questions. Again, friends, reach out to your donor advisor. They'll be able to connect with Fred and Tamara and get those questions answered as well. Our time has kind of draw our time is drawing to a close, so I want to wrap this up. And I'll say this: I'm grateful for your work. I'm grateful that you can reach places that all of us can't, and you're willing to go places that we want to go. And sometimes the best way we can do is to support you in your work. So thank you for that. And Tamara, I wish there was no need for a humanitarian team in the field, but that's not the world we live in. Disasters, conflicts, war, and the poor will be with us. So I'm just grateful. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful to our partners and donors who generously touch the lives of people by donating. So thank you for that as well. So as we close,
if I may just interject quickly, you asked
yes,
Fred, what is the success? What does success look like? For me, success will look like when there is no more job for me in humanitarian space. That is how I define success. And unfortunately, we have a long way to go before we get to that last mile. So thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate the support. We can only do it because of your support. There's definitely no doubt about it.
Well, tonight. It's tonight where I am, y'all. It's 9:30 or something. Hey, I'm asking all of our devoted Lutheran partners to help us continue to be prayerful and respond generously to this humanitarian crisis. Please reach out to your donor advisor. They might be sending you emails. You're going to get this recording. Send it to a friend, a family member, and say, hey, you know what? If you want to support as well, there's going to be, the website will be put up, and then give you opportunity to give. Also, you'll see our donor advisors as well. They're ready to help you. So as we close tonight, there's a simple prayer that touched me I heard it at Xavier University, and it goes like this. It's titled, Give Us Hearts. Let us pray. God of love and compassion, we always recognize your spirit. And the refugee families seeking safety from violence, and a migrant worker bringing food to our tables, and the asylum seeker seeking justice for their families, an unaccompanied child traveling in a dangerous world. Give us hearts that break whenever our brothers and sisters turn to us. Give us hearts that turn deaf to their voices in times of need. Give us eyes to recognize moments of grace instead of threats. Give us the voice to fail to remain silent, but which decides instead to advocate prophetically. Give us hands to reach out and welcome, but also in work for a world of justice until all homelands are safe and secure. Bless us, O Lord. Amen. Thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.